When I entered this story, it was already near the ending. I was walking down the aisle with the male lead, David Harrison, surrounded by everyone's blessings. But after taking a phone call, David's face went completely pale. He pushed me away and ran out of the church. Oh, if I calculated the time right, the female lead should have just attempted self-murder and was being rushed to the hospital. I've been transported into a story as the evil supporting character in a switched-up birth novel. I was the real daughter, and the female lead was the fake daughter. Once the truth was exposed, I was brought back to the wealthy Johnson family, while the female lead, Emma Johnson, was kicked. Everything that once belonged to her loving parents, a handsome and wealthy fiancé, the Johnson family fortune, all of it fell into my hands. And Emma, once fallen from grace, went from phoenix to ordinary bird. The adoptive parents who raised her for 18 years didn't want her anymore. The brother who always spoiled her called her a thief who stole someone else's nest. Her childhood sweetheart fiancé decisively broke off their engagement. Emma desperately tried to prove she wasn't a gold digger. She never wanted to compete with me. She just wanted family love. She worked hard at Johnson Corporation, but my father thought she was trying to compete for inheritance rights and cruelly fired her. She brought me gifts trying to improve our relationship, but my brother thought she was trying to harm me and slapped her. She graciously blessed my wedding with David, but uninformed people labeled her a homewrecker, and she faced online harassment. Finally, at the moment when David and I were having our wedding, in the spotlight, desperate Emma chose to end her life. But her self-murder attempt actually woke everyone up. My father and mother remembered the 18 years they spent raising her. My brother Michael thought of the soft, sweet little girl who used to follow him around. Her ex-fiancé David remembered how clumsily but earnestly she tried to make him happy. Everyone was filled with regret at that perfect moment. Emma's diary from after she was abandoned was conveniently discovered. It was filled with her longing for the Johnson family, her love for David, her guilt and blessings toward me. In her diary, she apologized to everyone and repeatedly said she never wanted to compete with me for property. She just craved a little family love. So everyone felt even more regret and guilt, swearing to do everything to make it up to her. After being discharged, Emma was brought back to the Johnson family. My parents did everything to compensate her. David finally recognized his true feelings. After a series of chasing wedding motif scenes, he finally got back together with Emma. As for me, the evil supporting character, because of my later jealous persecution of Emma, I was eventually despised by everyone. Growing increasingly crazy, I finally chose to drive my car into Emma. But evil ultimately harms itself. Emma miraculously emerged unharmed while I died in the car crash. When I entered the story, it had already developed to the stage of my wedding with David. When the officiant asked, "Do you take this man to be your husband? Whether he becomes rich or poor, whether he's healthy or sick, will you stay with him forever?" I decisively shook my head and said, "I don't." The entire venue was stunned. David lowered his voice and whispered in my ear, "What's wrong with you? Everyone's watching." I looked meaningfully at his pocket, where his phone had been vibrating non-stop. "You have a call," I reminded him kindly. David took out his phone and glanced at the screen. Obviously, he recognized the number and instinctively frowned, about to hang up. I quickly stopped him. "Don't hang up or you'll definitely regret it." In the original story, after Emma slit her wrists, she regretted it and instinctively pressed dial David's number, wanting him to save her. But David didn't answer because the wedding was in progress. Emma nearly missed the critical rescue time because of this. In the later chasing wife crematorium plot, those dozen unanswered calls would become a major source of angst between. But this time I wouldn't give them the chance. For all that back and forth suffering. After all, saving one life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. Seeing my insistence that he answer the phone, David was confused but still pressed accept. The next second, all color drained from his face. Then he pushed me away and rushed out of the church. The whole venue erupted. Confused, shocked, and gleeful stares all fell on me. My father, mother, and brother Michael immediately came to my side, their faces full of worry and anger. Before they could speak, I quickly said, "Dad, Mom. David just seemed to get a call from Emma." I vaguely heard her saying on the phone that she'd slit her wrists, was asking David to save her. My mother's face instantly went white. After all, this was the child she'd raised for 20 years. Those deep feelings couldn't be cut off overnight. She swayed, seeming unsteady, worried words spilling out. "Emma tried to kill herself. When did this happen? Where is she now? Has she been taken to the hospital?" My usually composed father now nervously clenched his fists. I showed a pale smile. "I don't know either." I couldn't hear clearly on the phone. "No, honey. You need to have someone check this out immediately." I have to go see that child. My mother suddenly stopped mid-sentence, looking at me nervously and guiltily. She suddenly remembered that her other daughter had just been abandoned by her fiancé at their wedding because of Emma's self-murder. Facing countless pointing fingers, I tried to look strong and spoke gently. It's okay, Mom and Dad. If you want to go, then go. I can handle things here. Emma might be in emergency surgery right now, fighting for her life. If something really happens, don't worry about me. I understand. After all, you spent 20 years together. Those feelings can't just be cut off. In the original story, after David left, I cried and made a scene, even forcing my parents not to visit Emma. Not only did this make countless people laugh at me, it also made my parents feel even more guilty toward her. Later, they would constantly remember how they were absent when Emma was most vulnerable and needed the most. But this time, I did the opposite, graciously encouraging my parents to visit Emma. When they left, they kept looking back at me with worry and guilt. Brother, you should go, too. I still wore that fragile hell smile, pretending to be strong. But Michael just shook his head and said calmly, there are already enough people there. I'll stay here with you. In the original story, because Emma didn't get timely rescue, she lost too much blood and was in critical condition. But this time, as soon as she made the call, David immediately rushed over and took her to the hospital. So Emma only suffered minor flesh wounds. After the doctor simply stopped the bleeding and bandaged her up. With a few instructions, he said she could be discharged. When my parents arrived, they saw Emma full of life, talking closely with David. They'd expected to see her barely alive and extremely weak. But except for a few bandages around her wrists, Emma looked completely normal. Remembering their biological daughter, who was abandoned at the wedding because of Emma, facing people's cold stares, while tending to be strong and even comforting them, they were instantly furious. Dad, Mom. Emma's eyes lit up first. Then she seemed to remember something and hung her head pitifully. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson. After personally raising her for 20 years, the feelings were hard to erase. My mother still asked, nothing serious, right? What did the doctor say? Emma nervously put her hands behind her back and mumbled, nothing serious, just flesh wounds. Sorry for making you worry. Good that you know. My father snapped irritably. You're an adult now, but you still act without thinking about consequences. Emma's eyes immediately turned red. Her mom and dad used to never bear to say a harsh word to her. Just because there was no blood relation, could all those previous feelings be so easily erased? David stepped forward, pulling Emma behind him like a knight shielding a princess from a dragon. He glared at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. Emma was in despair. She was bleeding. How can you care more about face and reputation than a human life? My father, Arthur Johnson, had built a billion-dollar empire from scratch. He was not a man who tolerated being lectured by a junior, let alone the man who had just publicly humiliated the Johnson family. Arthur's gaze shifted from Emma's lightly bandaged wrist to David's self-righteous face. His voice dropped to a freezing temperature. Bleeding? A paper cut bleeds, David. My biological daughter, who has done nothing wrong, is currently standing in a church full of reporters, business rivals, and gossiping socialites, bearing the brunt of a scandal you created. And you are lecturing me about despair? Arthur. My mother tugged at his sleeve, her eyes still lingering on Emma, with a messy mixture of relief and hurt. Let's just be thankful she's alive. Alive? She barely needs a band-aid. My father snapped. He looked at Emma, his eyes devoid of the paternal warmth she had relied on for 20 years. If you truly wanted to end her life, Emma, you wouldn't have called the groom exactly when he was standing at the altar. You didn't want to die. You wanted to ruin your sister's wedding. Congratulations. You succeeded. Emma burst into theatrical sobs, shaking her head violently. No, Dad, Mom, I didn't. I was just so scared. I dialed the first number in my recent contacts. I didn't want to ruin anything, I swear. Don't call me Dad, Arthur said coldly. We gave you a severance package, an apartment, and a trust fund when the truth came out. We did not abandon you to the streets. Yet you constantly play the victim. Keep away from my family, Emma. And David? My father turned on his heel. Consider the Harrison-Johnson merger permanently canceled. I don't do business with impulsive fools. Back at the church, I was busy executing my own masterclass in public relations. In the original novel, this was the moment I threw a screaming fit, smashing champagne glasses and looking like a deranged shrew. Instead, I stood at the microphone, wearing my custom Vera Wang gown, projecting an aura of dignified melancholy. Ladies and gentlemen, I spoke softly, my voice carrying a slight, perfectly calibrated tremble. I apologize for the sudden disruption. David received an emergency call regarding his ex-fiancée, Emma. She has had a medical crisis. As much as my heart breaks that my wedding cannot continue, human life must always come first. I looked down, wiping a non-existent tear. Please, enjoy the reception. The food has already been prepared, and the charity auction will proceed as planned. I will be donating my entire wedding registry fund to mental health awareness in Emma's name. Thank you. The church was dead silent, followed by a wave of sympathetic murmurs. What grace. She is so incredibly kind. David is a fool. How could he leave such a dignified woman for a cheap stunt? Michael stood beside me, his jaw clenched. When I stepped off the stage, he took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. You handled that flawlessly, he said, his voice laced with a newfound respect. Imshuri, sis. I really am. It's all right, Michael, I said, offering him a sad, weary smile. I just hope Emma is okay. I could never live with myself if a wedding cost someone their life. Michael scoffed darkly. Please. I know Emma. If she really wanted to die, she wouldn't have timed it perfectly with the vows. She's sick. I lowered my eyes to hide the gleam of victory. In one afternoon, I had successfully severed David's business ties with my father, won the absolute loyalty of my brother, and secured the unwavering sympathy of high society. The original female lead thought she was playing 4D chess. She didn't realize I had just flipped the board. 2 days later, my parents were sitting in the living room of the Johnson Manor. The atmosphere was heavy. Despite my father's anger at the hospital, my mother had been weeping quietly for 2 days. 20 years of raising a child wasn't a switch you could just turn off. In the original plot, this was when the maid would accidentally find Emma's diary in her old bedroom, leading to a tearful reading session that completely absolved Emma of all her sins and painted me as the ultimate villain. Knowing this, I had preemptively asked the head maid to clear out Emma's old room. Pack her things carefully, I had instructed. Send them to her new apartment. She might need the comfort of her old belongings after such a traumatic event. Right on cue, the maid walked into the living room holding a leather-bound notebook. Madam, miss, I was packing Miss Emma's things, and this fell from behind her bookshelf. It looks personal. My mother's eyes widened. She reached for it instinctively. I didn't stop her. I poured my father a cup of Earl Grey tea and sat beside him, watching the show. My mother opened it. Her tears began to fall almost immediately. Oh, Arthur, look at this. She wrote about how much she misses us. She says she never wanted to compete with her sister. She just felt so empty. She says she feels like a ghost. My father frowned, his resolve wavering slightly as he looked at the tear-stained pages. The halo of the female lead was trying to reassert itself. I leaned forward, my face a mask of deep, sisterly concern. Mom, can I see that? She handed it to me, wiping her eyes. I scanned the pages. The writing was textbook emotional manipulation, heavy on the self-pity, light on actual accountability. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice trembling with urgency. This is worse than I thought. What do you mean? My father asked. Look at the dates. I pointed to the top of the page. She wrote these entries after she moved out. But look at the ink. There's no fading. The pressure marks on the paper show it was all written in one sitting. But more importantly, read this line. I cleared my throat and read aloud. If I bleed out, maybe then they will remember the little girl they used to love. Maybe David will finally look at me again. It's the only way to make them see. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. Mom, Dad, I said earnestly, looking them dead in the eye. Emma isn't just sad. She is deeply, clinically unwell. She wrote this knowing she was going to attempt suicide. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a calculated plan to traumatize herself and everyone around her to force you and David to pay attention to her. My God, Michael said, having just walked down the stairs. He snatched the diary from my hands, reading it quickly. Disgust washed over his features. She planned it. She literally wrote down her strategy to ruin your wedding. We can't just be angry with her, I said softly, playing the ultimate saint. She needs professional medical intervention. Dad, if she's willing to slit her wrists for attention, what will she do next? What if she drives her car into traffic? What if she hurts someone else? We have the resources. We need to have her committed to a psychiatric facility for a mandatory 72-hour evaluation. For her own safety. My father's eyes hardened, but this time, not with anger. With cold, corporate pragmatism. You're right. She has become a danger to herself and a liability to others. I will call Dr. Evans at the private clinic. We'll have her picked up immediately. In the original story, the diary brought Emma back to the mansion wrapped in blankets and apologies. In my version, the diary got her an involuntary ride in an ambulance to a high-security mental health ward. While Emma was spending 3 days in a sterile room without her shoelaces, frantically trying to convince psychiatrists she wasn't actually suicidal and was just being dramatic, David was facing his own personal hell. The Harrison family business relied heavily on the prestige and capital of the Johnson family. When David ran out of the church, their stock tanked by 15% in a single afternoon. David's father, a ruthless patriarch, had immediately frozen David's bank accounts and stripped him of his title as CEO, replacing him with his illegitimate half-brother. Desperate, David came to the Johnson estate to see me. I met him at the gates. I didn't even let him onto the property. I stood behind the wrought iron bars, wearing a crisp, tailored blazer, looking entirely unfazed. "Let me in, please," David begged. He looked haggard. The handsome, arrogant male lead from the novel was currently sporting dark circles and a wrinkled shirt. "I need to explain." "There is nothing to explain, David," I said calmly. "You made a choice. You chose her. I respect that." "I didn't choose her," he pleaded, gripping the iron bars. "I thought she was dying. I was just trying to do the right thing. But now my father has cut me off, and your father won't take my calls. You have to tell them that you forgive me. We can reschedule the wedding." I looked at him with genuine amusement. This was the chasing wife crematorium phase. He expected me to be angry, to yell, to slap him. He expected passion because passion meant I still cared. "David," I said, my voice as placid as a still lake. "I don't love you anymore. Honestly, looking at you right now, I don't even respect you. Why would I marry a man who abandons his duties at the drop of a hat? You are a terrible businessman, a disloyal partner, and frankly, a bit of an idiot." His eyes widened in shock. You don't mean that. You've loved me since you came back to the family." "I love the idea of a stable future," I corrected him gently. "You proved you can't provide that. Oh, and by the way, I sent your engagement ring back to your father. He seemed very grateful to pawn it to cover the losses you caused his company." I turned my back on him and walked toward the mansion. "You'll regret this," David screamed, his ego finally shattering. "Emma is twice the woman you are. She actually needs me." "Then go to her," I called over my shoulder without looking back. "I hear visiting hours at the psychiatric ward end at 6. With the toxic male and female leads firmly removed from my orbit, I had no intention of sitting around playing the idle rich daughter. I went to my father's study that evening. "Dad," I said, placing a thick folder on his desk. "I want to enter the company." He looked up, surprised. In the original plot, the real daughter was too busy obsessing over David and bullying Emma to care about the family empire. "You want to work? You don't have to, you know. The family trust is more than enough." "I lost 18 years of education and grooming because I was swapped at birth," I said firmly, using the original tragedy to my advantage. "I won't lose another day. I've been studying the upcoming acquisition of the Texior Group. I've found 3 glaring loopholes in their financial disclosures. Give me a junior analyst position. Let me prove my worth." My father opened the folder. As he read my analysis, his eyebrows shot up. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since I was brought back to the family. He didn't see a traumatized, jealous girl. He saw a shark. He saw his own blood. A slow smile spread across his face. "Monday morning. Report to Michael on the 40th floor. Don't expect any special treatment." "I wouldn't accept it if you offered," I smiled back. Over the next 2 years, I threw myself into Johnson Corporation. Under Michael's mentorship and my own relentless drive, I rose through the ranks rapidly. I didn't need plot armor. I had a brain and I used it. I closed deals that made the company millions. The high society that had once gossiped about my ruined wedding now whispered about the Iron Lady of the Johnson family. Meanwhile, Emma and David were living out there happily ever after. It was a nightmare. Once Emma was released from the psychiatric hold, she found a very different David waiting for her. He wasn't the wealthy, powerful CEO anymore. He was a disgraced son with a frozen bank account. Because of the scandal, Emma was unemployable in any reputable company in the city. David tried to start his own firm, but my father blacklisted him. No one dared to invest in a man who had publicly crossed the Johnsons. They were forced to move into a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment. Without the glamour of wealth, their true love quickly rotted. Emma, who had spent 20 years being pampered as a billionaire's daughter, couldn't handle cooking, cleaning, or budgeting. David, who had never faced a hardship in his life, grew resentful of the woman who had cost him his inheritance. I kept tabs on them occasionally through private investigators, purely for my own amusement. According to the reports, they fought constantly. David blamed Emma for the fake suicide. Emma blamed David for being useless and poor. The sweet, clumsy traits that David once found endearing in Emma were now infuriating to him when she ruined his cheap suits with the iron or burned their dinner. They were trapped in a cage of their own making. The final nail in the coffin of the original plot happened at the annual City Commerce Gala. I was attending as the newly appointed vice president of Johnson Corp. I wore a sleek, tailored black gown, my hair pinned back sharply, a diamond necklace resting coldly against my collarbone. I walked in flanked by my father and Michael, the picture of absolute corporate royalty. To my mild surprise, David and Emma were there. David had managed to secure an invitation through a minor investor he was desperately trying to court. He looked aged. The stress of the last 2 years had thinned his hair and dulled his eyes. Emma clung to his arm, wearing a dress that was clearly a season out of date. Her previously bright, innocent eyes were now darting around with frantic jealousy. When they saw me, I could almost hear the grinding of their teeth. Later in the evening, I stepped out onto the terrace for some fresh air. The click of cheap heels followed me. "Are you happy now?" Emma's voice was venomous. I turned around, leaning against the marble balustrade, swirling a glass of champagne. "Hello, Emma. It's been a while. You look tired." "Don't patronize me," she hissed, stepping closer. The facade of the sweet, innocent sister was completely gone. "You stole everything from me. You stole my parents, you stole my brother, and you ruined David." "I stole nothing," I replied, my voice steady. "The parents and the brother were biologically mine. And I didn't ruin David. You did. With a phone call. You did this." Emma was shaking, her eyes wild. "You turned them against me. You made them lock me in that hospital. I'm going to expose you. I'll tell the reporters inside exactly how vicious you are. I'll tell them you drove me to suicide." She suddenly reached up, grabbing the collar of her own dress, preparing to rip it. I immediately recognized the trope. The classic frame the villain move. She was going to tear her clothes, mess up her hair, and scream that I had attacked her. I sighed. "Emma, look up." She froze, her hands gripping her dress. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the corner of the terrace. A small, red light blinked steadily in the darkness. "This is the terrace of the Platinum Hotel," I explained patiently, as if talking to a toddler. "There are high-definition security cameras recording 24/7. Not to mention..." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The screen showed a recording app running. "I've been in the corporate world for 2 years, Emma. Do you really think I'd step onto a secluded balcony with my known enemy without pressing record on my phone?" I stopped the recording and saved the file. "Go ahead. Rip your dress. Scream. I will play this audio for the entire ballroom and show them the footage. I'm sure the psychiatric hospital would love to have you back." Emma turned pale, her hands dropping to her sides. All the fight left her body, leaving only a hollow, pathetic shell. You're a monster," she whispered. "No." I took a sip of my champagne. "I'm just a woman who refuses to be a supporting character in your messy, melodramatic life. You wanted true love, Emma? You have it. Go back inside and enjoy it." Just then, David burst onto the terrace. "Emma, what are you doing out here?" "Mr. Sterling was just about to hear my pitch, and you disappeared." He stopped when he saw me. A look of deep, agonizing regret flashed across his face. He looked at my confidence, my wealth, my untouchable aura, and then looked down at Emma, who was trembling and pale. David choked on his words, his eyes locked on me. "You look beautiful tonight." "And you look desperate, David," I said coldly. I set my glass down on a nearby table. "Excuse me. My father is introducing me to the board of directors." I walked past them, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone. As I opened the glass doors to re-enter the glittering ballroom, I heard David's voice behind me, thick with anger. "Why do you always have to cause trouble, Emma? Can't you do anything right? Don't you yell at me. I gave up everything for you." Emma shrieked back. I smiled, stepping into the warm, bright light of the gala. The doors clicked shut behind me, completely cutting off the sound of their arguing. Epilogue. The main character. 5 years later. I sat at the head of the boardroom table. My father had officially retired a month ago, and the board had unanimously voted me in as the new CEO of Johnson Corporation. Michael sat to my right as COO, my most trusted ally and fiercely protective older brother. "The acquisition of Harrison Technologies is complete," Michael reported, sliding a document toward me. "Harrison Technologies?" I raised an eyebrow. "What's left of it?" Michael chuckled. "After David drove his father's company into bankruptcy, the assets were liquidated. We bought their patents for pennies on the dollar. I heard David is working middle management at a logistics firm now. Emma left him last year after he maxed out his credit cards trying to keep up appearances. Last I checked, she was working as a cashier in a boutique, telling anyone who will listen that she used to be a billionaire's daughter." I picked up my customized Montblanc pen and signed my name on the acquisition papers with a smooth, elegant flourish. "A tragic end for a fairy tale romance," I murmured, my voice devoid of any real sympathy. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. The city sprawled out below me, bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun. I had entered this world destined to be a stepping stone, a villain meant to die in a fiery car crash so the true lovers could realize their feelings. Instead, I had chosen myself. I didn't beg for love from parents who couldn't see my worth. I didn't fight for a man whose heart was easily swayed. I didn't play the villain's game. I just changed the rules. Meeting adjourned, I said, closing the folder. I stood up, adjusting my tailored suit, and walked out into the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. The story of the fake daughter and her Prince Charming was over. Mine had just begun.